Hello, this is a video about Seminar 2, which is part of Module 1, and today we're going to be looking at theories and models of community work. But before I start talking about some of the key points that are on the PowerPoint slides, I just wanted to acknowledge International Women's Day, which was Tuesday the 8th of March. And part of acknowledging International Women's Day is recognising the achievements of women around the world, but it's also recognising that there are still barriers to women's social, political, economic participation in different aspects of our society. And as part of that, I also wanted to honour one particular woman whose name is Berta Cáceres. And Berta is a Honduran woman. She's, she's an Indigenous woman from the Lenca people, and she is a woman who has been an activist in protecting the environment in the area that she comes from. And she has been organising peaceful protests and successful in preventing mining companies coming in and developing the area where she is from. And that included protecting a very significant and beautiful river. Sadly, Berta was shot in her own home last Thursday in the first week of March, and she was killed. And the police reported that it was a robbery, but her supporters are quite sure that she's been murdered by the authorities because she posed a threat to the government. She lived with threats against her life and her family, and 2 of her children left Honduras in fear for their own safety. I wanted to mention her name and honour her as a woman who perhaps demonstrates something that we're going to be talking about a little later this morning, and that's someone who's been living a life that's committed to green and environmental theories, has been living it in her own life. So I wanted to acknowledge Berta on International Women's Day. Something else that I just want to mention before we start talking about the theories is just highlight to people the importance about the readings, and encouraging you, if you don't already have a copy of the Susan Kenny text, which is the main text for this unit, if you don't already have a copy of that, you will find it really difficult to keep up with the readings for this particular unit. Some weeks you're required to read whole chapters, and access to that book's really important. So I'm encouraging you to either purchase one from the CDU bookshop or go to the library. There's a couple of copies at the CDU library, or for external students, organise interlibrary loans. With regard to assessment, we spent some time talking about that as well, and I just wanted to highlight that the first assessment task is due on Sunday the 13th of March, and it's a task that you're required to write 200 to 250 words about yourself and talk about what communities you belong to. It's great, some people have already posted their introduction on the discussion board in LearnLine, and if you haven't done that, I encourage you to do that and not leave it to the last minute. This particular task will not be graded, however you must do it. It's a requirement that you do it as part of this unit. The next learning activity will be graded. So I encourage you to get onto that. If people have concerns about any of the assessments, please don't hesitate to contact me or email me. What we're going to be talking about is the theories and models around community work. What are some of the influences? And I'm going to be looking at an overview of how different theories have shaped and influenced the practice of community work. It's worth thinking about the word theories and what is meant by that term theories. What do you understand it to mean? It can be a way of explaining or talking about something, making sense of something. There's a few quotes here. I'm looking at slide 4 at the moment, and a theory is really a way of explaining, if you do one thing, then something else will happen. If you do this, then that will happen. And there's a couple of quotes there that you can read that talks about theory as being a set of ideas and concepts that are used to think through particular issues or a particular phenomena. And having theories also helps us to make sense of the chaos around us, and also to critically analyse what's actually happening. Kenny has a quote there: community development practice is not just a set of technical procedures, but is embedded in specific values and theoretical understandings about the way society works. Thinking about theory is really important for those of us who are working in communities or thinking about working in communities, because we approach any work we do informed by our own values, our own ideas, our own attitudes, and also theories are going to shape the way that we engage with communities and the way that we approach our work. And the trap of thinking that community development, for example, is a list of steps or procedures that you have to go through is something that you need to be really aware of. And theories help to think about, how do I apply my understanding of community development work in practice? Also, our own values and ideas are going to affect that. So fundamentally, my beliefs about whether I think the society that I live in is fair, whether I think it's a safe place for people, whether I think people have equal opportunities, all of those questions are going to shape my own thinking and beliefs about society. I'm looking at slide 6, and part of talking about theories in community work is to also explore and to be very aware that there are so many theories that have influenced thinking and approaches in community work, but there's no right or wrong theories, and that you will find that you're drawn to particular theories that appeal to you because of your own values and your own beliefs. Also, you will find that different organisations have got particular theories and principles that guide the work. So for example, if you're to work for a child protection agency or part of government that delivers child protection services, there's going to be very clear theories and frameworks around that work and around the roles then that the workers carry out. If you're working for a non-government organisation, there will be again particular theories and principles that inform the work that is done by that organisation. Also, theories change. Last week we spoke a bit about social capital theory and how this was really significant in the 90s. Some theories have prominence and a lot of interest in them at a particular time in history. So be aware of that too, that there's a lot of shifting in popularity around theories. These examples that are on slide 7 really just highlight your own beliefs and how you think about the world and how that might shape the kind of theories that you feel comfortable with. So if you are someone who believes that the free market should dominate and that people shouldn't pay much tax, that people should pay for their own services and therefore get what they can afford to pay, that people should be able to look after themselves with not a lot of government welfare or involvement, then probably neoliberal theories might appeal to you more. And perhaps the idea of community and being connected to other people might not be as important to you. Or you might believe that people are collective social beings and that if we cooperate and work together, we can deal with problems, we can address issues, we can look at change in our community. You might, in that case, be more interested or drawn to Marxist or feminist type theories that really focus on how do we actually have equal access to services? How can there not be a huge gap between the rich and the poor? How can we have education and health services that are available for all, and that the state or the government should provide many of these services? Your views, depending on your own values, will shift accordingly. We just had a bit of a focus on language and power, and in your readings you will notice references to Foucault, who is a French theorist and who did a lot of work around questioning assumptions, assumed structures, particularly in Western society, and particularly did work around madness and how people who are seen to be mad are treated, the language and the discourses around that. I'm only mentioning this very briefly. There's a huge body of work that's been done by Foucault and other theorists that really explore how powerful language is and how that shapes the way that we work. And from the work of Foucault, we can come to some understandings that talk about community, that community is not linear, that there are many different ways of looking at community, that not everybody's experience of being in a community or part of a community is the same. In the light of what Foucault was talking about, we can also recognise that community development activities should not be limited to or seen as though they're technical procedures, that if you do one thing, then something else happens. And we did talk too about, for example, one particular activity in community development might be running a community meeting, and that people can say, yep, I ran a community meeting, but if we don't actually look at what happened at that community meeting, was power addressed in the way that the meeting was run? Did the worker sit at the front or stand at the front and talk to people? Were people in the room, the participants, invited to put forward their ideas, or were they spoken down to by the worker? There's lots of things we could unpack by just looking at a community meeting. So to simply say that community meetings is an activity or something that a community worker does, it's good, it's a good start, but we need to really be very aware as workers about what happens at that meeting, who sets the agenda, who's taking notes, who's speaking, who's standing up, who's not allowed to speak, are the right people in the room. There are lots of things in a community meeting that we need to be mindful of. And I guess that really leads to that next point about being aware of control in our society, and that workers particularly also need to be aware, are we part of perpetuating control? What does our position entitle us to? How do we acknowledge power, the power that we have? One way that we talked about this in the class and about the significance of language is we talked about the term disability and how this term disability has been used over the years, and particularly how it can be used as a label. When we talked, people in the room talked about how it can be used as a way of controlling and limiting people's options, that people can be referred to as a disabled person rather than a person who has a disability. We talked about how it can create barriers and can put people in situations where they don't have access to resources to live a full life. However, it also can be a way that people can have access to resources, particularly in Australia, where people may be able to access resources and supports and funding that enable them to go to university and study, such as a friend of mine was able to do, who was in a wheelchair and had a physical body that didn't allow him to move around, but had a mind that was incredibly inquiring and creative, and was able to go to university because of the supports that allowed him to do that in his wheelchair. So it's they're questions that I'd like you to think about when we're using language, and how powerful terms can be and how powerful labels can be. This will be a theme that I will talk about a lot in this unit. Moving on to looking at some of the theories in community work. I'm only going to speak about them really briefly, but it's important as workers to have a sense of what these different theories actually mean. So social capital theory is linked with social network theory and social exchange theory, and we're talking about in Seminar 1. Social capital theory is about social resources such as trust, the norms, the networks and the relationships that can build collective action. And social network theory can be looking at how people and organisations and groups interact with others within their network. And social exchange theory, that can explain the social change and the stability of a process of exchanges between different parties. So the social network theory and social exchange theory sit very closely to social capital theory. Systems theory and ecological systems studies systems, and it looks at patterns and explains the principles that apply to other systems. So for example, we might have a look at the system that is a family, for example, and look at the patterns and the relationships in a particular family where there might be 3 generations in one particular house, and look at the relationships between people, look at how decisions are made, look at who has the power, look at who has the money. A system, a family, can be seen as a system, and in systems theory, looking at one particular system, such as the patterns in a family, can be applied then to other systems. And similarly, looking at organisations. Many studies have been done looking at organisations and how organisations work, the structure of organisations, how decisions are made, how meetings are run. Looking at the systems in one particular organisation can then give information that can apply to other systems. So conflict theory includes Marxism and early feminism, and it really basically is looking at the differing amounts of social, political and the material inequalities, and looks at the exploitation of power and how to address those inequalities. And feminism in particular looks at the gendered inequalities, but feminism is much broader than that and looks at inequalities in society generally, and is both feminism and Marxism together. These are fundamental in terms of informing a lot of community work practice. Interorganisational theory looks at change across organisations and how organisations work together. So how organisations interact with each other. How do not-for-profits interact with government, interact with philanthropic? What's actually happening and what are the dynamics there? I'm now on slide 11 and looking at more theories in community work. Critical theory, that really encompasses a group of theories, including feminism, Marxism, and progressing right through to the post theories. It's really using social sciences and humanities and studies the reflexive assessments and how to change society as a whole. So looking at what can we get from different theories that assist us to address societal issues. So looking at the bigger picture. Chaos theory is one that I always find really tricky to understand because it deals with non-linear things. For example, it deals with the weather or turbulence, and the stock market is often what is referred to with chaos theory. So it really is looking at how the chaos that's in the world, the chaos in nature, is actually connected, and the stock exchange is used as an example of how what's happening at the stock exchange can affect what's happening in a country on the other side of the globe in terms of oil production, for example. Then there are the green and environmental theories. So these theories attempt to highlight the ecological and the social costs of industrialisation, and they focus on the impact on the environment. My introduction, I was talking about Berta Scherer, and she is an example of someone who would have been living her life informed by these theories, but she probably didn't study them at university. She was doing it out of her own life experience. But green and environmental theories see that we really need to be aware of and taking responsibility for day-to-day actions that are impacting on the environment. So green and environmental theories are also significant in community work. There's a lot more details about theories in chapter 3 in Kenny's book. The next quote on slide 12 is talking about community development. For community development, the integration of theory and practice brings together our theoretical understandings of how society works and our vision of how we would like it to work with specific strategies and tasks. And I believe that quote is going to be one that you're going to explore further in an assessment in April. But it highlights that theory and practice comes together in the way that we understand society and the way that we see how things work. Not only how we see how things are currently working, but also how we actually see the future, how we can see change is possible. I'm on slide 13 now, and these next slides are just really highlighting where community work comes from. And it generally does span from the micro to the macro levels of practice, but is more towards the meso-macro end of practice. So you're all familiar with these terms, that micro refers to individual, meso refers to groups and smaller communities, and macro refers to community and broader society and systems. We'll just have a look at micro practice. I like talking about an example of how community work can come out of micro practice, that working with people on particular specific needs and strengths can actually inform, and community work practice can come out of that. And one example of that is in the 80s in Australia. King's Cross in Sydney is a notorious area known for its strip clubs and where sex workers work from, where a lot of drug use was happening. In the 80s, a number of health workers and a doctor were treating many people who were drug users and who were dying of AIDS. Their job was health workers to look after people's health needs. What they saw happening in terms of the individual people they were treating and caring for their health needs, what they saw happening was significant health issues, and they also saw people dying from AIDS. It was very controversial at the time, but these health workers and doctor, they took what they were seeing in their day-to-day practice of working with people to go to government, to go to politicians, to go to government departments, to propose that people who were drug users had the right to have access to clean needles. As simple as that. So something that we're familiar with now is having access to needle exchange programs so that drug users weren't using dirty needles. They could see this was going to be a solution to the issue. It was really controversial at the time, and because of the work of those medical people out of their micro practice, they were able to change legislation and able to have needle exchange programs in that area. I met a young woman the other day who works at that health practice, and she's very proud of the history of that clinic that's based in addressing a huge issue and workers actually being successful in changing practices. In community work, a lot of the work is done around working with groups of people, and that might be families, it might be small groups, it might be neighbourhood groups, it can be action groups, interest groups. This is where a lot of community work is done, and the role in that area for community workers is around bringing people together and looking at common goals, often planning, addressing issues, and looking at how can we as a group of people address the issues that concern us. The macro practice is, at this level, is where, on the bigger picture, the work around community work is around linking with other organisations, perhaps government, perhaps business. How can we get resources? How can we get assistance? How do we get support to address the issues that are concerning us? So it's rather a focus on, again, stepping back. Who are the other bodies that can support us to address these issues? And that quote there, networking the networks, on slide 16, is fundamental as part of community work. And community workers' role is often making those connections, speaking to those people, introducing people to the others who have the resources, who can assist people in the community to address those issues. One small story that I have about that in my work as a community development worker in a small disadvantaged rural community was speaking to people in the little town that I was working with. It was quite a poor town, and people were really upset because they felt the council was ignoring them. The council was not improving their footpaths and their roads, and in some places there was sewerage from the houses running into the street. So, the water from the showers and the bathroom was running into the street. So there were some problems, and people in the community were pretty upset about that. So as a community worker, I asked them what they wanted me to do. I had choice as a community worker. I could have done different things. I could have gone to the council. I could have taken someone to the council. But after speaking with people in the town, it was clear that what people wanted was some council people, some senior people in the council, to come to their town and to walk around the streets with them. They wanted to show them where the problems were. So as a community development worker, my job in that case was to support the community members to set up the meeting and to be there for the meeting, but to allow them to talk and walk around the town together with the people who lived in the town, the council, the mayor, to walk around and have a look at the problem. And at the end of that meeting, we were also able to talk to the council about when would they do something about it, when would they actually address that issue, when could we get back in contact with them, and talk to them about who would get back in contact with them. And the people who would get back in contact with the council were the community members, a couple of people from the community. It's just a little story to demonstrate that one of the roles as community worker is to link people together, is to make networks, is to encourage people to talk to each other, not necessarily always doing it as a worker, but in supporting other people to do it. Next week we're going to be looking at Rothman's typology, and that's the readings for next week. Thank you. Bye.